Welcome to Mogobe Nuggets of Wisdom podcast. My name is Mompoloki Lerumo Mogobe. Our objective is to enthuse, inspire, energize, and empower entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs of all stripes here in BW and beyond. We do so by inviting these entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs into our makeshift studio. Sometimes we call them to the restaurant, sometimes we go to our studio, and we ask them to share their experiential knowledge, their experiences and their expertise. And we ask them as many questions as we can, aimed at empowering you also as a viewer. Hello dear viewer and listener, thank you so much for taking the time out to watch Mogobe Nuggets of Wisdom podcast. I bring you yet another exciting guest who's going to share everything there is to share about employee experiences in the workplace from a consultancy point of view. I hope I'm saying that right. But before we get into the meat of our conversation with Mayor Bonang Kwape, please do me the service of just pressing that subscribe button. We really, really appreciate your support, guys. Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, I forgot to mention that we're looking for sponsors. If you guys are interested in having a slot in the program, and whether it's goods or services that you have that you wish to share with members of the public, especially our viewing audience and our followers and our subscribers, do contact my PA, Andile. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. I look forward to the conversation.
Okay. Let's start with your background in terms of your training and so on.
Okay. So, in a nutshell, I'm an organizational development specialist. By training, I'm an industrial and organizational psychology.
Psychologist.
Yes, so I'm a psychologist, but an industrial psychologist,
Okay.
not a clinical. And so I've spent the better part of my professional life consulting either internally as an employee full-time or on my own on all things people, with obviously a little bit of a bias towards organizational development, which leads me to why I care about what we're going to talk about today. But from a career perspective, I've worked pretty much all over the world, various countries, especially in the consulting space, but my three main countries being Botswana, South Africa, and the United States. And I've worked in all industries really across the range, utilities, logistics, healthcare, a bank. My last corporate engagement was as HR director for FMB until January 31st of 2021. I've gone back to my consulting, which is where actually I joined FMB coming from. So for I think 6 years prior to me joining FMB, I was with Bonang Group again. So I've gone back to Bonang Group.
Your roots.
Back to my roots, yes. I quite enjoy the flexibility of consulting, but there's no telling if I'll go back to corporate again. It's never.
You seem to go seamlessly in and out.
Yes, it's not so seamless. I must be honest, which is why it's important for me to discuss things like, organizational culture and what the employee experience is. Obviously, in my role as HR director and HR just in general as an org development specialist and any of that, this is what I'm charged with, making sure that we can define that well for the organization, make sure that we can execute well, and that the workplace is not a painful place for people to come to every morning when we start having palpitations on Sunday because you have to show up on Monday, then we're probably not doing something right. So this is stuff, that's why it's important to me.
I wonder whether it's true what I read somewhere that most heart attacks are on Monday morning because people have trepidation about going back to work. Is it true?
The research says so, and this is especially true when people are working in what we'd consider or term toxic cultures, and they don't envision a way out, or they don't have a way out. It's especially true of young professionals. I think when you're older and you've been around the block and your track record and your experience speaks for itself, sometimes when you're caught up in those kind of environments, you have the luxury, and I call it luxury, to be able to walk away. When you're a young person starting off in your career, it's not always that simple. So you find young people being, I call it being stuck, and it's very hard to unstuck them, if you will.
Yeah,
so I totally would get why there's this Monday phenomenon.
for lay persons like me, what is the real distinction between these areas of psychiatry, clinical versus industrial?
Okay. Yeah, that's actually a good thing, because I think sometimes people assume you can do it all, and that's not what we go to school for. So I think in the simplest terms, it would be that if you're an industrial psychologist, the other word for it is business psychology. So you do psychology specifically for the business, for the workplace. Whereas with the clinical psychology, you treat behavior, or you handle behavior, and it's more personal, which is where you always are referred to as the one who's going to put me on the couch. So those are the people that put you on the couch. If we're putting anybody on the couch, is the business or the company or the entity. Yes.
Maybe
so
the CEO.
Yes. So I think the simplest way to do it, to make the distinction, would be that way. Yes.
Now, is the industry established in Botswana, or are you one of the very few?
Luckily, we actually have quite a wealth of talent in that space. I think the challenge is that organizations and that actually need our services aren't quite aware that they need our services. And I think that's where at least the challenge and the joy for me is. And because it's, for industrial psychologists, you're not getting your juices flowing if you're not finding things to fix. So if it's a smooth running operation, you're not really that beneficial. Yes. So and which is the challenge, that you need to go and show these people that, listen, you actually could benefit from my expertise, from my experience, because I see this. It's like a big landscape of what we can work around together with and fix. So
is HR part of industrial psychology, or is industrial psychology part of human resources?
We find ourselves in the HR space because we do business psychology. So you'll find that a lot of industrial psychologists work in the space of HR. If they don't, they usually do technical roles like, statisticians, analysis, that type of thing. But in general, because we do people stuff, we find ourselves in HR.
Okay.
Yes.
Before we talk about what you're doing now, can we talk a little bit about your experience in corporate? What were you doing largely?
So I've done very many roles in corporate, but largely I was basically after making the organizations that I work with better by developing the overall organization. And that means anything from how we define our leadership brand, from how we recruit and onboard people, from how we develop talent, and how we identify and create the opportunities to grow our people. So it's really the entire HR value chain, but I've done it, like I say, for different entities. So for instance, when I worked for logistics, it was more around how do we optimize our third-party logistics, for instance. How do we make sure our drivers are more efficient? How do we incentivize them better, especially if they're around performance specifically? When I was in healthcare, it's around making sure that we have good working clinical teams, because I was mainly responsible for running clinical trials for principal investigators in a teaching hospital who are all medical doctors. So it was around making sure we have the team dynamics right, and how do we optimize around delivering the right service and good clinical practice for our research subjects, who obviously in this case are patients. And then I've done also banking, like I said. So it's just around, a number one bank like FNB, how do we stay number one, and how do we make our people continue to do well? How do we continue to churn out good products, good service? So it's just the entire HR value chain, really.
Okay. What would you say are the biggest challenges, especially in BW?
I think we have a serious culture problem. And I want to be very clear. I'm not saying that the Botswana culture is a problem. I think we have a serious corporate culture issue. And a lot of it is driven by relationships. Because we're such a small country, it's almost impossible to go into any entity and not know people. So that already is a problem, it's already an inherent problem in itself, because you can't really get employed somewhere where you don't know anybody. But this is where also the challenge begins. So there's the perception, real or imagined, that you're there obviously because you know somebody. And then once you're in, how consequence management is handled, how development is handled, how remuneration is handled, also gets linked back to these things. Or it's because they're so-and-so, it's because they're related to this person, it's because they're married to this person, or they're dating this person. It becomes very difficult. So a lot of the time, the toxicity of our culture while some of it is very, very real and very, very true and needs to be, urgently addressed, some of it is very perceived because of those relationships. So I think the biggest issue is the size of our population. So the culture becomes tainted by not necessarily things that are on the ground, but although sometimes yes, but also sometimes by things that we just are product of by virtue of our size. Yeah.
You talked about consequence management?
Yes.
What does that mean, and can you give examples?
This is basically around how you handle, I don't like the word wrong, or how you handle behavior that is not desired, let's put it that way, or that is unethical or illegal in the workplace. So for instance, we have an HR recruitment process, and then I decide I'm going to throw away the book and lock it in the cupboard because my niece, who's been unemployed for the past 3 years, needs this job, and therefore I cheat and give her the interview questions and hire her. I should be taken to task because that's not the principle and the philosophy by which we're entrusted with taking care of people. So the consequence management is around, well, how are you going to do it? There should be principle in place, policies and processes that are in place to say, if you breach this policy, this should be the measure. So for most institutions, we have as part of our staff manual, what we call our schedule of offenses. And of course, you would know as a lawyer, they obviously don't rise to the same degree of transgression. So and also the resulting consequence is also not the same. So if it's a big transgression, it would have a corresponding outcome, and then a really, really grievous act would also have a corresponding outcome in terms of managing that consequence.
Okay. What if there was any kind of training that is needed for employees? What would you say the training should be on?
I think it should be around, and this is it might not be the popular position, but I think it should be around ethics more than anything else, because a lot of the time what is going wrong is not people not knowing what to do, but it's people choosing not to do what's right. But I say this when I say it's maybe not the popular opinion, because recent events suggest that the people who go out of their way to try and live and espouse these values of ethics and fairness and justice, oftentimes in corporate environments are then somehow end up being the outcasts. So the system sort of chews them up and spits them out. When in fact we speak of, employees that are people-centric. I mean, companies that are people-centric. We take care of our people. We want to be fair. We want to treat our people fairly. So if really this is what we say we want to be, this shouldn't be happening. And it's not just a Botswana thing. It's a phenomenon around the world. There's many instances where the whistleblower is now the enemy number one. But I do think that we can't give up on this, because I think it's within our power to change the narrative and make sure that we can have entities that are really, respectable and honorable and do the right thing most, if not all of the time.
Let's talk about Bonang Group. What inspired it? And tell us about the first one, because you said you had it running and then you went corporate and now you've gone back to it. Tell us
So I always knew, I think from a very early age in my professional career, that I wanted to consult. And I'll be very fair and very honest. It was largely driven by being able to contribute how I felt was the best way I could contribute. Now, it doesn't mean that corporate is a bad place, but when you run your own entity, you can pick and choose the jobs that you feel have most impact. And so I knew that at some point I wanted to do that for myself, and it was a perfect vehicle for me. I had been away lived outside of the country for 20 years.
In the States?
I was in the States for 13 years, and then I was in South Africa for 7 years. So when I came back to Botswana, I didn't immediately look for work. I knew that I had already started the consulting in South Africa. The last 2 years I was in South Africa. But I knew that I wanted to continue that because I had gotten a lot of fulfillment from it. And it was really around, how do we optimize human capital in all of our institutions, public, private, and otherwise, so that we're driving what is now, as time would have it, the biggest thing around performance, and how do we create those high-performing cultures. And that is really what started it all for me, like to be able to do it in my own time, in my own space, and feel like I'm having the right impact by choosing where I think that impact would be most felt. So that's how it happened. And then I got super lucky because I obviously didn't know anybody home. I had been away from home for such a long time. I really pride myself in being able to do it well, so that the work speaks for you. And so I was able to continue to have work, because consulting can be really hit and miss. I was blessed because by virtue of what I had done for clients, they were very happy to recommend me to other clients. So for the 6 years that I was consulting, I was gainfully busy and gainfully employed for the entire time. So it was quite good. I know that it's not always the case in the consulting space, as you would know also, but so that
maybe
worked out for me.
it has something to do with the level of talent.
I hope so. Thank you. And then so when I went to FMB, I think the timing was also very challenging. I started in October of 2019, and we had COVID. I was literally on the job. I think it was when I was finishing my probation that we had COVID. And so my 2 years and something months, they were primarily forced me to handle disruption, which is also
firefighting.
Yes, which is something which I love. If I don't have a challenge, I'm not feeling like I'm doing something meaningful. So it forced me to then think about, okay, this disruption is not a once-off. We'll continue to have these type of disruptions. What is it then that I can bring back to the environment that is not FMU, that is not corporate? And so after 2 years, I think I was actually surprised myself, to be honest, with how much stuff we could deliver in that 2 years. We had a kids lounge. We had a fully fledged employee wellness center. We were able to do a lot around performance management and contracting and that sort of stuff. So I felt like I had contributed how I wanted to contribute. I probably could obviously contribute more. There's always room for improvement. But then I felt like it was I could go back to what has sort of always given me that fire in the belly. And so I went back. So it was sort of a reincarnation of Bonang Group. It didn't dry because I didn't want to have a conflict of interest since I was the HR director. But I had my freelancers or people that I'd always worked with. If they wanted to do work, they could do it. It just couldn't be me, because obviously I didn't want to
you had to train them first?
Yes, these are people that I've worked with for a long time. I'm very passionate about equipping young people. Maybe it's because I'm the spoiled last born at home, but I think young people are very important. So I've always wanted to. I worked with them from even before I went to FMB. So they've always been in the background, and then obviously there's always fresh talent. Some of them I've met while at FMB that have asked me to either mentor them, coach them. I'm also a qualified coach.
Wow.
I've had the opportunity to also just meet more young people and get called in to speak to graduating students at BAC, UB, that sort of thing. So I knew that there would always be people that can carry forth the work. I don't by any stretch of the imagination think I'm doing the work that anybody else can't do, but it's always just a blessing to be able to see a young person blossom and become somebody that's confident enough to do it without you.
Absolutely. I do a lot of mentorship myself, so I can relate. Insofar as COVID is concerned, that's when you really, from what I understand, thrive, in the sense that you seem to thrive under chaos or within chaos.
I hope this doesn't say much about my own personal life.
But what were the unique challenges around COVID with employees, and how did you assist them to address them?
It's actually, the biggest thing was people just feeling safe. Everybody was worried about coming to the office. Obviously, in my role, I had to go to the office more than most people. But we did a very, very, I think, fantastic job of enabling employees to work from home. In fact, we did such a good job that most corporates benchmarked using us because we had gotten it right. It's not to say that we didn't have our own teething problems, because obviously nobody knew what COVID was going to do. But we were able to, the enablement included even allowing people to take desks and chairs home. We had to negotiate with the insurance, because obviously, if you're insured in a building, then if these things are now in 600, 700 different buildings, those are the considerations. But we were able to do that. Everybody got Wi-Fi at home, so that you could not now have the challenge of saying, well, I couldn't reach so-and-so in a meeting because they couldn't have access, and take laptops. The people that were obviously slightly disadvantaged were those people that are customer facing, that had to be in the building, or that are in the branches, for instance, when the branches were open, if there wasn't total lockdown. So I think it also just increased, because we at FNB is quite a young staff complement, it just increased the ease with which young people also interact with technology.
Wow.
And the entity is largely driven by technology, which is a good thing. So we're able to get a lot done. And I think we ran throughout the period a number of surveys around how people are performing, if productivity has laxed in some way or another. Yes, granted, there'll be the odd person that takes advantage of something, but for the most part, we were able to continue to
How do you
produce and
actually
deliver.
monitor productivity remotely?
That's a very good challenge. It has to be rooted in outcome-based performance management and not presence. And I think traditionally, we call you a performer because we see you in front of an open laptop, and that's not how you're going to manage it if you're doing a hybrid model or if you're doing a remote work thing. So we've had to also adjust that, and to also help the supervisors and managers to be able to manage that performance. It's the basic, simplest way to say is that you're not looking for hours logged, you're looking for deliverables. So if I'm supposed to have done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 by a certain date, the performance is strictly, have I done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in that space? And what have I done as a manager or as an employer to enable that performance to happen in that period of time? Because you also have a responsibility as an employer. I can't ask you to deliver, and yet I haven't enabled you with the laptop, with the access, with all of the things that come along with being able to work remotely. So it really is just that, being able to just reduce it down to what needs to be done and when was it done.
Yes, I mean, obviously, for the employees, they're able to go to work with their pajamas, but beyond that, how does the employer actually quantifiably assess performance?
So we have a lot of HR analytics as well. We have a lot of data analytics. And because we're on technology, so there's lots of Teams, Zoom, all of these other meeting platforms, we actually have the capability to see the level of engagement of employees and how much they're either engaging in meetings or how much work they're doing. So you can pull those reports if you have, for some reason, a suspicion that maybe one function of the area of the business is not doing as well as the other. So those tools are available to us, and we actually have used them and continue to use them. We also just look at the quality of the outputs of what people are doing and be able to look at it from the basis of when they were in the office. Has the quality slipped, or is it still the same? Is it better? So an entity that cares about continuing to be competitive and have that high performance culture entrenched is one that does not shy away from analytics, and that's not afraid to look at it itself and say we're failing in this regard. So that's something that actually really helped a lot, especially around measuring and being able to reward appropriately.
Okay. And in terms of now Bonang Group, what is the setup like, and what are the main deliverables for yourselves that you're working on?
Okay, so I am now, I always tell everybody now I'm just doing all things people because I obviously care about people. I have the default bias because that's what I've done all my life. So what we do at Bonang Group is that we enable organizations to drive high performance culture as a fundamental, as a basis. But we also then do the things that feed into that high performance culture. So whether it's team dynamics, whether it's we help you develop, refine, and execute, implement strategy. Whether we also help you find the right talent. Obviously, with our experience, we've recruited top talent everywhere in the world. So if you want, a specific need filled, we assist with that as well. I also mentioned that I went to school recently and got qualified as a coach. We also offer coaching services. Our coaching is specifically professional coaching, is business coaching, it's not personal coaching. So a lot of the time our need is at the C-suite level.
What do you mean by that?
Executives, senior management type level. It doesn't mean that we wouldn't coach lower levels. It's just that for the culture to be really driven in the right spaces, you have to have the right leadership doing the right things most of the time. So there's great value in making sure that your executive team, sometimes board even, or senior managers within the organization go through a coaching process so that they are supported the right way to be able to drive that culture. You can't drive it if you don't understand it yourself. And also to entrench the right leadership behaviors, because every entity has to have a clearly defined leadership brand around how they see themselves as leaders in that entity, and how then they filter it to every single individual within the entity.
It goes to dress, it goes to mannerisms. Yes. Does it go to also social media behavior? 100%.
I remember we had an incident in a corporate before where, we obviously have a social media policy, because any self-respecting company now has a social media policy, because you never know what people would say on social media otherwise if it's not guided. And I remember there was a time when employees were not. You see, we were so efficient that employees were paid like at 2 a.m. in the morning of the pay date. And oh my goodness, they didn't get paid until 8 a.m. It was just chaos. They was like blasting social media. Oh, what is happening? Are we not getting our money today?
From 2 a.m. to 8 a.m.
Yes.
When they were sleeping.
Because of course it's always the expectation, so you have to manage the expectations.
Yeah.
But in their minds, it was like the most egregious thing ever done.
Yeah.
And that is the culture, because in that culture, this is the expectation, and that expectation is over and over reinforced.
You're victims of your own efficiencies.
Of your own efficiencies. And so you have to say to people, by the way, you do know that the payment is not late until midnight of that day. So up until 12 midnight, you can still get paid, even if at 4 p.m. or 8 p.m. And needless to say, a lot of them was like super unhappy because this is not the answer they want. But so when you speak of culture, these things, like what are we driving? Are we driving, where we have a collective, but also the social media part, because now where do you get off saying that you haven't been paid when the pay date is not even complete, just 2 hours, whatever. So
it requires management.
Yes, it requires that leadership to then say, no, this is not how we behave. Nothing has been done to you. You have not been treated unfairly. What really is the challenge?
Behave yourself.
Yes.
All right.
And remind them of the social media policy. You do know we have one.
Yeah.
Right? You cannot be saying stuff like this.
Yeah. It's difficult to compare cultures, but having worked in America, South Africa, and here, are there any aspects about us that you think we need to? I want to start on the positive that we need to import or deserve of emulation from, say, South Africans or Americans, something about us as employees, as Botswana?
I think our temperament is very good. Maybe too good, in fact, because when you work in other countries, you fight, you call each other names, you curse each other out, all sorts of things happen. I think in Botswana we generally are able to go through and work through conflict. I think a lot of countries can learn from us in that way. I think we're very good at that. On the flip side,
yes, I was getting there.
We are terrible at being able to separate personal and professional. So if I've wronged you, and it's not for everybody, but the likelihood is that you never forget it. And every interaction with me from this point forth, you still have this thing in the back of your head. Like, you don't separate that this was a business requirement, a business need, a business decision, and we can still coexist after this. In South Africa, the other dimension is the very same African culture then permeates the boardroom as well. So you have people being really upset at you because you didn't call them Sisbusi or Budmandla, because it's not differential. Even though maybe even they could be not at the same level as you are hierarchically. But then it becomes such a big thing. So I think we do it well in Botswana, which is probably why I haven't experienced it in Botswana. But it also can have its own challenges, because when you're like wanting to be like strictly professional, it doesn't mean you can't have relationships or be nice to people. But those are some of the things that I think we've navigated quite well. But I still think we have definitely a long way to go.
Okay. Yeah. America?
I must say I enjoyed working in America, because maybe it also my personality lends itself to, I've had the most difficult conversations in the United States. I've had the worst manager in my life in the United States. But this woman, to this day, I respect her, and unfortunately she lost her life recently. She had breast cancer.
Sorry.
But she never, not one single time, me and her understood that we didn't like each other. She never once cheated me on an increase, on a performance appraisal, on anything that I deserved. She was that fair. And I think that is generally the American corporate way. Now, it doesn't mean that they're perfect, they don't have problems. They also have their own issues. But I find that if I had the same scenario in a South Africa or in a Botswana, I mean, it is painful. It becomes this thing where it is so personal that unless you can find an exit plan soon, you really are this person that is having the heart attack on Monday because you're panicking, what am I to do next? So I think that's what I miss about the US. We could fight absolutely viciously, but we could then still go and have drinks after work, and
that's
it's
remarkable.
done. Yeah.
Well, I've heard my previous guests complain about the culture of entitlement among Botswana. Have you detected that, and what do you think can be done about it?
Okay, I want to still stay alive in Botswana, so I'll be careful.
Yeah.
I think it's also not necessarily entitlement. I think it's how we measure value and how we think people contribute. So if you've been reminded your entire career that you're absolutely God's gift to the world, you tend to believe you really are God's gift to the world. And unfortunately, most companies don't spread around that love. They identify like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people who get that benefit and not extend it to others. On the general side, though, people feel, because we haven't had real challenges or difficulties in how our, in our, democracy, in our politics and all of these things, we've just had everything handed to us. I mean, part of the reason I was in the US is because the government was paying for me to go to school, right? And so we've never struggled like other nations. And I think what people term entitlement, I think is just lack of awareness and lack of struggle, because we haven't had to fight for stuff. So everything has been simple. You go to school all the way until varsity, everything is paid for. You have different government services, you can go to hospital. The US, you don't want to be sick because you can't afford it. It's these type of things. So we sort of just get comfortable, and I think that's why there's a sense of entitlement. So when you tell somebody, even in the office, like, do you understand that this action has a reaction? They look at you like, this one thinks that she knows too much, or she's so horrible to me, or whatever. So I think that's why they call it entitlement. It's not always entitlement in my view. There's obviously pockets of it, but I think it's based on our history as a country more than anything.
And to the extent that this is a problem, how can it be addressed?
Like, I would never want to wish hardship on us. But it seems that's the best teacher, because the countries that have gone through hardship, they've learned to take initiative. If you look at the African countries that they have their citizens, making marks at Harvard, in the UK Parliament and wherever else, they're not necessarily coming from Botswana. It doesn't mean we don't have those people in Botswana. We have a few of them. But they've had that already. So you can't really wish the hardship on us now. I don't want to wish that on us. But I think there's also some serious work that can be done around building resilience in organizations, and that's some of the work that we do also at Bonang Group, like teaching resilience, understanding adversity, and also just the deep work that can be done around self-awareness and emotional intelligence, because it's still an area that is very lacking behind in how we function in the corporate space.
I find as an entrepreneur that if there's one ingredient that we need the most, is resilience, perseverance, grit, call it what you may. And I'm glad that it's something that you teach and something that you're very passionate about. What are the key ingredients in terms of what we need to develop it?
There have to be will. There has to be the will. It's like everything.
But do you have to trigger it? How do you get it?
Yeah, I don't know that you can trigger it. I don't know what you would do to trigger it. But I think if you create the space, if you create the latitude for people to feel safe in environments and open to making mistakes and learning, which is what we, is the employee experience. Am I going to get killed for a mistake? Am I going to, what is the consequence if I make a mistake, or if I say the wrong thing, if I do the wrong thing? If we start from there, then most people are not willing to become vulnerable, because to learn resilience is to admit that I don't have it. And I think once we can teach that vulnerability is not a weakness, then you have a chance. But if we are perpetuating this thing in the corporate world where if you're being vulnerable, you're weak, and you'll never make it, and you actually, like, everybody piles on top of you about how weak that was a thing to cry or to be emotional or this, then that's a problem. So I think that for me is the fundamental. Allowing vulnerability is a trust. So if I'm vulnerable towards you, it's only because you can be vulnerable back towards me. I'm not going to be vulnerable to somebody who just is like stoic, stone-faced brick. It doesn't make sense. Nobody does that. So if we can create the safe space, there's a very important phenomena in the workplace now called psychological safety. And so when we create psychological safety in organizations, we allow people to be vulnerable. And you can then go and discuss and build this belief and resilience and how you overcome. I do some work on values, and it's always interesting when with clients, and I say to them, if you look at your friends from high school, there are some who are working on the street, who are drinking every day, that you even find them and you buy them a beer. There's somebody who's a CEO, there's somebody who's living in an incredible mansion in Pakalani with exactly 2.5 kids, and there's a spectrum, and I always ask, why do you think that is? And I say the other thing is we've all lost some people we've loved, but we didn't die when they died. We woke up and we continued.
We're still here.
He was still here, right? Because if that happened, there would be nobody left, right? And that's just the point, is that what you value most. If you value the idea that nothing breaks you in the sense that it doesn't destroy you, then you put in place the fundamentals to sustain that. And that can be taught externally, but you have to understand that actually something that's a possibility and very, very, very available to every single one of us.
Well, people need to experience change. So sometimes I notice that change is instigated by internally or through an external occurrence, like a disaster occurring. Do you think that there are senses in which COVID has helped us as Botswana?
Oh, yes.
In that sense?
Yes.
Can you speak to that?
I think as Botswana, like I said, we're comfortable. We're a comfortable nation. Even when things are not going well, I think we've heard, the threats of we're going to shut down the government and we're going to do this and then. But ultimately, we make peace and we all go home nicely and we sit down. So I think because of that, we assume everything will be taken care of. Eventually, it might not look like how we want it to be taken care of, but we have this thing that it's going to work itself out. With COVID, we had no such assurance. And in fact, we had more instances to worry than to not be worried about. The stories around the procurement of the vaccine, all of these things that were happening. So we really, this was the opportunity.
The dangers of vaccines themselves.
The vaccine itself, what were the side effects. So I think it helped us in that it made us realize, at some point, your destiny is also a part of your own action or inaction, as it may be. And so we had to be responsible for ourselves, for our families, our employees, outside of just me.
I learned that in SIPA. SIPA experienced an explosion in companies being formed.
Yes.
So people suddenly started being entrepreneurial.
Yeah. And also it taught us that there are more important things than my Range Rover and my mansion in Pakalani and my thing, because I could just not have them tomorrow because I could not be here. And one of the things that as a Botswana, I think we should be proud of is that we care about family, but we never understood what it is to really care about family until we had COVID, because you just never knew. And so it taught people to just not, it lessened the selfishness, if you will, or the self-absorbment, if you will, to some extent, because it was never just about you. You knew that your actions also could potentially impact somebody else. So that was really important.
Let's go back to the issue of culture, employee culture, organizational culture. How do you define it, and then how do you cultivate organizational culture?
I think let me answer you this way. Maybe let me speak about culture in the context of the employee experience, because it's a holistic thing. So let's start with the employee experience. So the employee experience is made of 3 pillars, which is space, technology, and culture. All right. And it's fundamentally about how employees interact with their organizations and the context under which they communicate or interact with their entities. So this is what in the not olden days, but this is what most HR practitioners in the past would have said, your employee value proposition, what it is that you can sell yourself as to your employees. What is it that they say, if I'm hired by FNB, this is what I'm most proud of. If I work for ABSA, this is what I'm most proud of. Well, now here's the thing. the fly in the ointment became COVID. So you could buy nice couches and put plants in the offices and give people nice perks and buy lunches every once in a while. And that was almost sufficient. But now the value system is not that. And especially because with the disruption, now we're not in the office, all of us. So what the employee experience says is, how are we then still having that shared experience as employees when we're either hybrid or fully remote? So that's the basis for it. Now, there's lots of studies that have been done around the disruption and what it's done. One of the things that consistently shows up is that we now have more stressors than we had prior to COVID.
Really?
Yes, believe it or not. And worse, it actually has started to impact productivity negatively. So people are not looking for the same things that they were looking for when you employ them. So as an employer, it's absolutely imperative that you find out what then the experience of the employee is when they work for you. Couple that with the fact that after COVID, now people are not married to work because they've discovered value in other things that are not money and things. So what they value now is not just a big salary and whatnot and the corner office and whatever. And in fact, currently, the latest study by Forbes in the US says we have up to 15% of voluntary loss of job. So people who are walking away. So it's up to 15% of people.
They call it an exodus.
Yes, and it really is. So, and the numbers are pretty much probably quite comparable in our region, but although that we have our own issues of unemployment, so it's not maybe as bad. But the reason why is because the employee experience is not what these people want, because what they value now is different from what they valued before. So now the key values for them is around flexibility. People don't want to be tied down to a permanent and pensionable employment. They want flexible contracts. They want flexible hours. They want to be able to work for 3 different countries while sitting right here in Gaborone. They want, but more importantly, the one thing that was never such a priority is health and wellness. So
including mental health.
Yes. So the employee experience now 100% has to include health and wellness, and especially, like you said, mental health, which we saw a serious uptick because during the COVID period, because of all the stresses, you're worrying about your parents, your spouse, your children, and everything. So now, what entities are doing is, because you have to give the same experience to me sitting at home that you're giving to somebody that goes into the office, they're beginning to procure what we call employee experience platforms. And there's a number of really good ones. Some of them, if I can remember some names, Lattice is one.
What does that mean?
Multivivo, like they have a bunch of them, where in essence, some are better at just measuring engagement, some are better at just doing more health checks, some are better at doing surveys, just dipsticks to see where employees are. And so none of this, because your question was culture, none of this works. It doesn't matter how sleek and refined and tech savvy and whatever and beautiful and elegant it is. None of this works if it's imposed on a culture that's already not right. And that's where the leadership and the culture comes. So from the culture to be right, it has to be a concerted effort by the leadership to say, we want, as Access Bank, as Protea Hotel, we want to look like this. And this is what our culture is. We've defined it in this way. Do we have our people subscribing to what it is? And does that also conform with what our leadership brand? Then we can worry about the overall customer experience, employee experience, what does it look like? So in a nutshell, to feed into that employee experience with the culture and the tech and the space, the culture is 100%, in my view, driven by leadership. And I actually thought about it when I was coming here. Today, somebody, one of the people that I respect on LinkedIn posted something and said, when women have boundaries, no, that does not make them sociopaths, right? And I thought, oh, wow, that's really interesting. Because in a lot of organizational cultures, a woman who says no, or who's assertive like me, or says I'm not gonna do this, or this doesn't make sense, or I disagree, or
the vocal woman.
Yes, they are labeled the difficult one. And so, as an example, if you have that culture existing in an organization, no amount of fancy employee experience platform is going to help you. It will not substitute for that. No. So we have to start with the brass tacks, the fundamentals. Who are we? What are we trying to do? You cannot espouse employee-centric organization, fairness, mental health, but you do the exact opposite and think that somebody doesn't see it, and that is going to feed into what will be an amazing employee experience. So I think from that perspective, So I think from a culture, and that's the other thing. So a lot of entities, especially in private, in the private space and private corporate, if I may, we have also the other check and balance of the board. So if the culture is not also checked and supported and espoused by the board and the executive suite, it becomes a complete swimming uphill from the beginning. You cannot win because you are one person against the system. And the reason why all these cultures
can it persist, happen? So it means it literally cannot happen without the intervention of someone with your skills and your training.
Yeah, but even with me, with the best of efforts, if this is not what the executive and the board buy into, even I with my fantastic ideas will not change this. Because there's something about, if I say to you as an employee, we treat theft very seriously here. And then you go and steal 17 million. And then this young man here steals 20,000, and then I fire him, and then I'm busy trying to tell you that we take theft seriously. These are the inconsistencies that make culture such a difficult thing. Until you can actually really take it upon yourself to say, yes, when we say we take it seriously, we do take it seriously. And believe you me, there's not a single employee in that entity that doesn't see these things. And if you hear of how quick the grapevine is, it's never quicker than in an organization, including how much you make every month. Everybody would know, and they should not be knowing, or who you're fighting with at home, they would know, because that's the nature of people. If they are together all the time and they have relationships, they talk. So you cannot hide the fact that you didn't discipline your EXCO member, but you're going to discipline your analyst. It doesn't work.
Or your janitor. Or
your janitor. It doesn't work.
I want you to take a bit of a moment to blow your trumpet in terms of what Bonang Group has done. Without necessarily mentioning names, an organization that was in this state, X, transforming it to this state, Y. What happened and how did you get there?
So should I talk about transformation, or can I talk about merger and acquisition also?
Both.
So let me start with the merger because it's a quick one. There's an entity in South Africa that they were doing really, really well. This is pre-COVID. Actually, beginning of COVID, that they wanted to acquire a smaller entity. So Bonang Group got the gig to do that merger and acquisition. And as you can imagine, the only reason we would be beneficial is because we do behavioral stuff and people stuff, because we do HR. And so teething problems notwithstanding, challenges around legislation, because obviously with mergers and acquisitions, you would know, you're the lawyer. I'm not even going to try to go there with you. But all of that notwithstanding, it was a very successful, and also with the disruption of COVID, because this project started prior. So by the end of COVID, towards the end of COVID, the merger looked entirely different than when we started, for obvious reasons. Both entities had lost quite a significant part of market share. Staff dealing with COVID absences, COVID deaths. At the end, it looked very different, but we successly delivered the acquisition.
And what was the key secret sauce, so to speak, for you guys to achieve this?
Nothing more than consultation and the buy-in of the right stakeholders. So stakeholder management is one of the most critical and most underrated parts of being an efficient consultant. I cannot come and impose anything to you. I don't care how much money you pay me. If you don't own it, it's like when I do a strategy. If I don't help you co-own the strategy, if I just author one for you, it doesn't work. You need to know what it is that goes into it, because you own it and you have a vested interest in what it looks like and how it's gonna
So it requires a lot of time commitment.
Oh yes, a lot of time. And there's nothing unusual about being on your laptop at 4 a.m., 3 a.m. in the morning. And that's why you always say, there's flexibility because you don't have to do a 9 to 5.
Yeah.
But the reality is you actually log more hours than if you have a 9 to 5.
By far.
Yeah.
By far.
Much more.
Okay. That was on the mergers and acquisition side. What was the other example?
I don't know if you wanted to ask about what.
Just
other things we've done for entity,
apart from
transformation.
Yes, transformation.
Okay, I almost said the name.
Yeah,
Locally, we actually did a reorg for an entity. That was like strictly based the reorganization, but the mandate was strictly on the basis of it was a change mandate, so it was on the basis of the change strategy that there needed to be a reorganization, and part of it had a government involvement as a shareholder or stakeholder, and so there were those considerations also to think about. So, and the entity is fully reorged and integrated. Although yes, now in the past, I think. Maybe the past year and a half, there have been some things that have come up that probably deserve a relook. But yes, we've been able to, and the biggest thing with transformation is just around taking the people along on the change journey, because a lot of people are their biggest issue when anything is introduced. I'm actually currently working on an entity now. I was with them on Monday, and they're changing their business model. Completely. And the first thing that everybody wants to know is, am I losing my job? Which is the normal human reaction. Yeah. So there's
a sense of panic.
100%, and it's very, very legitimate. And as a consultant, you can't come and dismiss it also. So as Bonang Group, we sit and actually take you through the process of what the change is. Doesn't mean that you would not lose the job, but we also manage you through the process of, if God forbid, it ended up in a Section 25, what does that look like? What is available to you? What are your options? That sort of thing.
Section 25 is what?
When you retrench.
Retrench, yes.
Yeah, but also more importantly, because we have the experience and the tools, we'll also take you through the process of actually understanding the change, not just from a what am I losing perspective, but from what changes. It's the same principle with technology. If you remember, everybody was not happy with technology.
Nobody wanted to be on Facebook.
Then we realized because it's technology, it creates new opportunities that never existed before. So it's the same thing with the transformation. There's some things you now can do that you could never do in the past, which means also it translates into roles. Okay. So even in HR space, as an example, entities like I was talking about employee experience, companies actually hire employee experience managers, head of employee experience specialist. In places they even call it chief happiness officer.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
Yes, because you're now intentional, and that means that role did not exist.
It's not just given to HR.
Yes, and it's not just. Mostly it becomes people that have like people experience, because obviously they understand people, but that role was not there. So just because there's a reorg doesn't mean everybody is being told to go home. It means that you can also be upskilled, which is the option that most entities will avail to their people. You can be upskilled for a different benefit or different contribution to the entity. And I wanted to actually talk about that we even close to home here, APSA, FNB, I know for sure FNB Zambia has appointed a people experience. Well, they call them people experience officer. They have a people experience officer at APSA. Definitely Nando's in the region. So we're also catching up to understanding that we can't just leave it to chance. We have to be intentional about how we create this employee experience. And we can also, as Bonang, help you understand that.
How is Bonang, are you reaching out to the community, as in the corporate community and the general community? I'm thinking in terms of even young entrepreneurs and startups to try and develop this awareness at an initial stage, infancy stage.
Yeah. So what I wanted to do and what I promised myself I'd do if I fail at everything else is to assist startups. Now, obviously, if they're really small and they're just starting out, most of them can't afford the astronomical consulting rates. So what I did intentionally when the year started, around I wanted to take a few months off after FMB just to relax a bit because it was hectic. But from around April, May, then I went out and found all the startups that I know of through word of mouth, LinkedIn, friends, calls. I speak at different events as well. So I do a lot of interacting. And I specifically wanted the startups that you mentioned because I know that they can't afford a full HR resource. So I help them with things like policies, I help them with staff manuals. Then they don't have to pay me like to keep me for a month. They can just say, we can agree, like, I'll give you 2 hours of my time every week, or I'll give you an hour of my time every second week. So that my biggest thing being that the people practice is important, but more importantly also, if you get it wrong, there's real risk around what the Employment Act is and what our labor laws are, so that they don't find themselves in that quagmire, which a lot of entities, because you grow, you know, God willing, everything goes well and you grow, so you need to be able to take care of that. So I've done that through like different various avenues, and I still continue to speak. I was even just at the BTC Digital Summit that time, do the HR Summit from time to time. So yeah, I do a lot of speaking engagements, and then of course I coach. So when I coach people, they will then reveal whether they also have somebody that they think might benefit from the coaching, or there's an entity that I might be helpful to them. So yeah.
Now let's look at the future. 10 years, 15 years. What does your crystal ball tell you about brand Bonang and brand Bonang Group?
I think the brand will still be alive and well, and hopefully still doing well. I'm not sure that I'll be full-time at it, because in my desire to give back, I think the last thing I'll do in my old age, and I'm almost there, is to impart knowledge in a different way. Like I've always groomed and mentored and things, but now I want to actually teach. So the plan is that even if I go back to corporate, I have to be in an environment that allows me to do my PhD, which I've put off for the longest. So in 10 years, God willing, I should be in a room teaching young people what it is to do whatever it is that they want to do around the people space. That is my goal, that I get my PhD in industrial psychology, and that it allows me more latitude also to write and to publish.
Well, I was going to ask you, there's a book.
Yes.
Is there a book in the works?
I'm a bit of a lazy one when it comes to writing long things, because I'm always like, I'm a Virgo, I don't know if it means anything, but I'm a perfectionist by nature. So I think this book will take years and years, because I'll be like picking apart everything that's wrong, but eventually it must happen. So I think in 15 years, Bonang Group will be continuing to enable business, and I will be hopefully getting my summers off, because I only teach from January to May.
All right. Is there anything you want to ask me?
No.
Normally, you get to ask me one question.
Oh, I get to ask you a question?
Only if you want.
I just wanted to know what was the transition like from strictly law to now property.
It was seamless, because for about 12 years they overlapped.
Okay.
So it wasn't, it was gradual.
Okay.
And even the law, I haven't abandoned it completely.
You still practice?
Yeah, so it's still a source of some challenges. Occasionally I go to court, but rarely.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, we've come to the end of our conversation. I want you to look at that camera there and leave the viewer with 1 or 2 words of inspiration and motivation as we part.
So I think I'll speak maybe to younger professionals. The landscape of corporate is not without its challenges, but it also can be very rewarding. And you must not ever feel like, as long as you're being employed by somebody, you have to live in a space where you please everybody. You must find your passion, and that purpose will move you to do the right thing and guide you in the right way.
Wonderful, wonderful. Would you like to give all your contacts, social media and elsewhere?
Yes, I can find me at Bonang Group, at bonanggroup.com. And then I'm on email, info@bonanggroup.co.bw or info@bonanggroup.com.
Okay.
I also have a website. It's bonangkwape.com. My Insta handle is Muddy Bones, just because it's not really work.
Muddy Bones.
But yeah, it's even on there that it has my website. So I look forward to catching up with her, all of you.
No WhatsApp contact?
Oh, it's WhatsApp 766 388 75.
Okay. Thank you very much. You've been a wonderful guest.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.